Commission. Paul, it says that you're going to start the recording of the virtual meeting, but I see the button that says we are being recorded. And you said you would be announcing who is here and record attendance at the meeting. So why don't you take roll and then we'll get going. Or let us know who's here, however you want to do it.
Well, as we have been doing, I will read the names in the order that they're on my screen. I will not be calling out titles, and I'm doing this mainly for the minutes recorder's purposes. So beginning with the panelists at this time, I see Ellen Currier, Andrew Martin, Joe Burney, Ray Smith, Franny Brindle, Heather Buck, Dan Collister, Kelly Clark, Dan Hurley, Rachel Dorfman, Emma Newman, Jennifer Willer, Bill Johnson, Mark Johnson, John Marshall, Lucy Venice, Metro Television, Michael Wist, Steve Moe, Don Norden, Drew Pfefferly, Rob Innerfeld, Tom Schwetz, Sean Van Gordon, Sid Schoaf, Sasha Vartanian, Brenda Wilson, Kate Wilson, and Megan Winner. We also have 7 attendees, including Len Taylor, the minutes recorder, 350 Eugene, Carlene Riley, Claire Roth, Colin Hill, John Faville, and Rob Zako. That's it, Commissioner, at this time. Oh, excuse me, we just had one more panelist join. I'm not sure who that was. Travis Brower from Odot has joined us.
Great, and you said we do have a quorum. So
yes, we do.
I will now call to order and convene the February 3rd, 2022 MPC meeting. The first item on our agenda is to approve the January 6th, 2022 MPC meeting minutes. Are there any changes any member has to the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll second it.
Thank you both. Mayor Smith has moved to approve the minutes. Mayor Venice has seconded. Is there any discussion to the motion? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed, same sign. Let the record show that the January 6th, 2022 MPC minutes are unanimously approved. At this time, are there any adjustments to the agenda or any announcements from MPC members? First, are there any adjustments to the agenda? Yes, Mayor Venice.
I don't know whether this is an adjustment. It's a question. We had long discussion last time about the RTP and our desire to come back regularly to talk about the RTP, and it's not on today's agenda. I'm just wondering if staff could kind of speak to that about when and how that is going to move forward.
Paul?
Yes, Mayor, I'm happy to respond to that. I believe I indicated last month, and we are still on track, that we will be bringing to you at the next meeting in March what we've been calling the roadmap or the path forward over the next several years with respect to all of the transportation planning activities that we foresee, both with, directly related to the RTP, but also the state activities as well as other federal activities. The staff committee will be addressing that agenda item immediately following this meeting, and we are on track for bringing that to your next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other adjustments or questions about adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, are there any announcements from any MPC board members? The only announcement I would just share is that I did, as chair last month, provide direct testimony to the Oregon Transportation Commission. Paul and I went back and forth. I elaborated a bit, discussed our priorities, discussed the provisional nature of the applications that we're turning in, discussed why. And I think it was extremely well received. And I want to say to Mayor Van Gordon and Commissioner Buck that our discussions with the chair of that body, I think yielded a lot of fruit because we acted like we knew each other. The entire board saw that he was delighted to see us weigh in, et cetera. So it was very positive, I think, and that's my only announcement. At this time.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
No, we can't. That's Steve,
Oh.
Steve, I couldn't say no if I didn't hear you.
Okay. Now I got audio on my iPad here. Oh, I don't know what to do here.
Councilor,
Now
we see when we hear you, and we're delighted you could join us.
Me too. Thank you.
Okay. The next item is item 5. Paul, this is where we ask for comments from the audience. Anyone wishing to comment, please raise their Zoom virtual hand. Mr. Thompson will call on speakers in the order of hands raised. And I am reading a script. This process now also involves temporarily moving each speaker to Zoom panelist status. So there will be a transition few moments between each speaker. Paul, could you moderate this part of our agenda?
Yes, Chair, that's I'm prepared to do that. So I am looking at the attendee list now. The first speaker with their hand raised is Rob Zako, and I'm currently promoting him to panelist. So Rob, when you're able as panelist, please speak.
Good morning, members of MPC. I don't have a lot to say this morning. I'm mainly wanting to be a guinea pig, the first person to try this new technology and see if I embarrass myself. I can see you, and it looks like you can see me and hear me, so this is all great. Much thanks to staff for making the transition to this technology to allow the public to participate. I will add, and thank you, Mayor Venus, for your question about the RTP, and Paul for your answer. We understand that we're on a process, a continuing process to always be revising our plans, our investments, and we look forward to that. If I were there with you in person today, I would hand out a draft of a resolution that Best and our partners have been developing. This is just a draft right now. We're still working on this and going to get signatures. But we're looking to partner with you and to be helpful and useful in this process going forward. We would invite, if you have any feedback on this draft, to please share that with me, with us. But we plan to come back next month with a final version of that, of what we're wanting to see and what we commit to doing, and hope that that'll be helpful to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. I am changing you back to attendee, and if you give me a moment here, I will promote the next speaker to panelist. Chair, that is John Seville, and John, you should be able to be promoted to panelist now and speak when you are ready.
Am I now a panelist?
Yes, you are. We can hear you and see you. Thank you.
My name is John Favo. I live in Northeast Eugene. I am a member of the Northeast Neighbors Neighborhood Association Board. In your January 6th meeting, the MPC unanimously approved Odot's local prioritization of projects for seeking IIJA funding. Tell you how much we agree with you, and the top 2 priorities on that list are of particular importance to our area. That means completing the improvements on the Delta Beltline interchange and finally constructing that arterial bridge across the river. Really, we're just encouraging you to keep doing what you've started to do, which is to speak.
Probably do, but I can't talk now. I'm in a meeting. So.
Meetings. You know, don't rely on written commentary. They get hundreds of pages and they complain about not reading it all. As the OTC progresses over the next few months from allocating funds into large buckets and starts looking at projects, please keep these projects front and center, make them a priority for the OTC and also the state level of ODOT. I also want to say just a word about why this is so important to our area. We are a neighborhood that is defined and really cut off by the Beltline. We all know the estimate that the local bridge is going to take 25% of traffic off of the Beltline. That's us. Okay, that's us. It's going to jobs, going to services, going to appointments, going to shopping. When we do that, we are a hostage to the Beltline. We're a hostage to parking lot congestion. We're a hostage to level of service of E and F at the major intersections. By the way, hey, for what it's worth, one of the commissioners on the OTC knows exactly what I'm describing because she lives in our neighborhood. So I throw that in. Finally, I want to say we are a large and very fast growing part of the city. We have over 6,000 addresses now, and that's up 40% from what it was 7 years ago. We're asking simply for easier access to other parts of the city. Thank you very much, and keep pursuing this. Thank you very much.
John, thank you for your comments. I am moving you back to attendee status, and Chair, at this time, there are no other attendees with their hand raised. I would ask if there's anybody else that would like to speak. If they could raise their hand. Okay, Chair, I'm not seeing any other indications. I believe public comment is done.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for those that did provide comment. Are there any questions or responses from any MPC members regarding public comments made? I don't see any. We're now on item 6, elections of chair and vice chair for 2022, and appoint OMPOC members. Forgive me, to demonstrate my ignorance publicly, Paul, OMPOC again is?
The Oregon MPO Consortium.
Okay. Before we start, I would just like to say this. It really, I kid a lot, but it really has been an honor. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to get all of you, to know all of you so well. There are things you learn as chair that you didn't know. And there's things you learn as a board member, your second or third year. We're all on so many groups. And I did not realize that the MPC was not the MPO. And I didn't realize that that actually could make a difference. So I hope this year, this is something that we want to tackle, as at least deal with and learn. There may be very legitimate and good rules for that I just don't know. Also, I would like to say that I really appreciate Rob Zako and many members of this group, because it's really hard sometimes, as you all know, to dig deeper. We're involved in so many things, and really look at the direction of something and really start talking about making changes to that. But I think we're in times that are moving so rapidly, and we all have done that. We've begun that process, and I'm just really delighted and gratified. And thank you for allowing me to be chair this last year. Having said that, Paul or Brenda, I understand. Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor Smith. Oh, thank you very much, Ray. I understand, and Paul, you can kind of correct, but my understanding is that the chair rotates from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and that each entity decides who their nominee will be for those positions. Paul, it's my understanding that the next rotation, someone from the city of Eugene will chair this. The city of Springfield will have someone vice chair this, and we need to make those elections now. Did I miss something?
Chair, all I would add is that the MPC bylaws require that the chair and the vice chair be a representative from Lane County, Eugene, or Springfield, simply because those three jurisdictions are the only three that serve under all of MPC's functions. So we have to have the officers, be from one of those three. It's not required that the jurisdictions rotate, but that has been the tradition for decades.
Okay.
And so, yes, it is under that tradition. It is turn for Eugene to be chair and Springfield to be vice chair.
Under tradition, not requirement.
Correct.
Okay. At this time, is there a motion for who might want to be or serve as chair in 2022? And I see Mayor Venus had her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Commissioner, I really do want to thank you for your service on this board. It's been great to have you in that leadership role, and really appreciate your role as presiding officer. Councilor Groves has expressed, he's served as vice chair. He's expressed a willingness to step up to be chair. I support him in that request and would like to nominate him, even though he's not here today. He knows that this is coming. So I would like to nominate Councilor Randy Groves for chair.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
My eyes heard Commissioner Buck, that's good. My ears heard Commissioner Buck, my eyes saw Mayor Smith, so I believe there's a second there. Mayor, since I have to work with her, can I say Commissioner Buck seconded that? No, I'm just kidding. Thank you. Are there any other nominations for chair? Seeing none, it's been moved by Mayor Venus, seconded by Commissioner Buck, that Randy Groves, who's not here, and he should know better if he's volunteered, Councilor Groves serve as chair. Is there discussion to the motion? All those in favor, please signify by yes.
I see a hand up from Don Norton.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, Mr. Norton. You're muted, sir.
I'm sorry, my tech is not working and I have to connect a phone and a computer here today. We started this conversation about UMPAC, and now is that what we're still talking about, or are we talking about the chair of the MPC, which seems to be what we were doing?
Yes, sir. And I'm sorry if I created confusion. Chair of the MPC.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions or discussion? Seeing none, feel free to interrupt though. All those in favor of Councilor Groves from the city of Eugene chairing this body in 2022, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Well, congratulations, Randy Groves, wherever you are. We now have to elect a vice chair who it looks like will probably be chairing this meeting in one moment. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
Well, it comes from.
I saw Commissioner Buckton.
Go ahead with Mayor Van Gordon.
Oh, Mayor Van Gordon. I would hope that you would make this. I'm so sorry I didn't see your hand.
I would like to nominate Steve Moe for vice chair.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Can you see me? All right.
It's been moved by Mayor Van Gordon, seconded by Mayor Smith, that Steve Moe, Councilor Moe of Springfield, be our vice chair of the MPC for 2022. Is there discussion to the motion?
No.
Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by hand and voice. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Moe, Councilor Moe, Steve. Before we move any further, though, it does say that either Brenda or Paul will describe the duties of, as Dawn had said, now OMPOC members. Is that correct, Paul?
I am happy to give you a brief report on that. Yes. So the Oregon MPO Consortium is the statewide consortium of all of the Oregon MPOs. We also have membership in that consortium from the MPOs that straddle the Oregon-Washington border. We currently have as your representatives on POC last year, Steve Moe and Caitlin Vargas. The Oregon MPO consortium meets quarterly. The next meeting is a week from tomorrow, and I'm going to, if I can, really quickly just show you that the agenda for February 11th here is sort of typical of the meetings where OMPOC will be electing its officers for the year. It will be talking about one of the topics we're going to talk about later today, the IIJA funding. And then you can see some of the other things that we're talking about, the new MPO planning emphasis areas, which I had mentioned to this body last month. OMPOC will be getting a briefing on the LCDC rulemaking. Standard on the OMPOC agenda, then we wrap up with an Odot update on whatever topics they wish to discuss, and then we have a roundtable on topics of interest from each MPO. Again, the quarterly meetings until 2 years ago were in person and were mostly full-day meetings. Obviously now we're doing virtual meetings and they tend to last about 3 hours. And we need 2 of our MPO members, 2 of you, to serve as the representatives for this year.
Yes, Vice Chair. We can't hear you, Steve.
Okay, I'm currently a member of that, and I'd like to continue on for another year if you would allow me.
Excellent. Paul, I presume you're looking for another volunteer?
Yes, please.
Is there anyone else that would like to volunteer to serve in this position? Going once? Yes, Mr. Nord.
I'm finally pushing. I don't. Okay, I have this open. We have had Kate Reed and Caitlin Vargas serve as LTD board members on this in the past, and Caitlin is unavailable right now and has changed her position. So, you know, I'm volunteering to fill in that position if Caitlin doesn't wish to do that any further, but we don't have that conversation from her at the moment. So, well, if we have to make that decision today, then I'll volunteer. Otherwise, we'd like to have discussion with Caitlin before that is approved.
That sounds like a reluctant volunteering under changing circumstances.
No, I'm willing to do it all right. I just didn't want to undercut Caitlin if she wanted to do it. And I haven't had that conversation with her, so I don't know that.
Thank you, sir. I think, Paul, do you want to clarify something now?
No, Chair, I'm just, again, not to clarify or to suggest either way, but Kelly Clark at LCOG, who is our lead staff, and again, we staff the statewide consortium, and Kelly Clark here is the lead staff for OMPOC. I'd be happy to have her reach out to Caitlin and see if she wishes to serve or would prefer to turn that role over to Mr. Norton.
Does maybe head nods here? How does the board members feel about that?
I mean, that feels like a reasonable, if Caitlin wants to continue serving, I think that's fine. If Don is willing to step up, I don't know how we vote on this now is my process question. And we need representation in a week. Is that correct?
Ideally, we would have 2 members present, but it sounds like we will definitely have at least one. I'm assuming that Councilor Moe can make the meeting next week. Mayor Venice, this is an informal appointment. You can vote or you can appoint by head nods.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm fine with this proposal of reaching out to Caitlin and letting her continue if she wishes to, and if not, grateful to Don for stepping into the breach.
I see some thumbs up. I also don't know why I'm doing this because I'm no longer the chair. We'll make sure that changes here in the next agenda item.
You're doing so well.
So at this point in time, what's the motion?
The motion.
Chair, I was sorry if I was suggesting that a motion is not required. Now, if you wish to have one, please do. But I was suggesting that just head nods in support of Councillor Moe continuing and in support of either Ms. Vargas or Mr. Norton serving in the second position.
Perfect. Head nods.
Okay, that's, can I nod my head?
We're good. Now, even though now I am going to absolutely relinquish the vast power that I have as chair, and should be giving this to your new chair, Councillor Groves. He's not here, so it's my honor to give this to my dear friend, Councillor Moe. Councillor Moe, if you could chair the rest of the meeting, sir. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll be glad to do that. I've got good notes here. Our next item is the amendment to the 2021 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. And when I ask for staff presentation.
Chair Dan Collister will be providing that presentation. So Dan, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
All right, thank you. This item is a request from the city of Springfield for funding from the MPO's discretionary funds to augment the existing Laura Street project. It's a Lane County project along Laura Street in the city of Springfield. That project was approved by MPC for funding. It's currently $3.1 million to improve the section of Laura Street in the city of Springfield that is under the county's jurisdiction. But there is a section of Laura Street that is under the city's jurisdiction. As the county project is moving forward right now with the engineering phase, the city of Springfield is wanting to cooperate, collaborate, work together with the county to extend this project to include the full corridor. So the request is for $250,000, which does include the local match for engineering of that additional segment, the city of Springfield segment, with potential future funding request for construction later down the road. The request or the recommendation from the Transportation Planning Committee is due to the timeliness of this request, not wanting to hold up the county's project. The recommendation is for an expedited approval, which means our typical process for programming new discretionary funds is to have a public hearing, 30 days for public comment, and then at the next MPC meeting, we ask for MPC action. The expedited process is to complete a 2-week public comment period, which is what is required at a federal level, and then to have a public hearing and MPC action at the same MPC meeting. So that's what's being requested today, that a public hearing be conducted. The 2-week public comment period has been completed. There were no comments received, and the resolution is included in the packet. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about the project specifically or about the process.
Ask questions, people. I'm not used to being chair, so I've got to sort of come up to speed here. So I suppose at this time we should. Are you ready for me to open the public hearing? There's no questions.
It looks like there are questions.
Oh, okay. Okay. I see 2 hands up. See, I don't have the full screen here. I've got it up here, so I see two hands up. Okay.
I was just going to put a motion on the table, but if Commissioner Buck has to make, I'll let her go first.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a question. Again, normally if a road is within a city limits, the county generally wants to transfer that road to the city jurisdiction. And so I was curious if this was something that was going to facilitate that. And I see
I'll have to defer to Lane County or City of Springfield for that.
I'm happy. This is Sasha Vartanian with Lane County. I'm happy to address that question. Yes, in fact, we already have an IGA that's going through the approval process with City of Springfield. It's now in the board's court. We're putting together a packet that would, upon completion of construction, transfer that section of Laura Street to the City of Springfield.
Okay. Everybody disappeared on my screen.
Chair, may I suggest that we at least formally open a public hearing and conduct that?
I'm prepared to do that. So they're going to make a motion when we're done here, but I want to open up the public hearing, ask anybody who wishes to testify, raise their Zoom hand, and we will listen to what they say. Do you have any?
So Chair, I'm looking at the screen now. We only have 4 members of the public in attendance. And at this point, I don't see any hands raised. I would ask once more that anybody wishing to testify during this public hearing, please raise their virtual hand at this time. And Chair, I would say that we do not have anybody wishing to testify.
I will close the public hearing then.
Thank you.
So questions, comments, discussion by NPC members? And if not, I will ask for a motion for approval.
I so move.
Moved second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? Then I call for, raise your hands. Let's see what we got here. I guess the motion passes. Good, got through that one.
Thank you.
Good.
All right, thank you very much.
All right.
I'm pretty rough with this, but we're gonna do it. Next one is, the screen goes blank and sort of throws me off. Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, funding priorities. And I want staff presentation.
Chair, thank you. I'm just going to do a real quick introduction of this item. This is a continuance of our ongoing discussion around providing input to the Oregon Transportation Commission, or OTC, on priorities for use of the flexible funding out of the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. If you recall, we've had a presentation 2 months ago and discussion and testimony submitted last month on the funding pots, and the OTC, with Commissioner Bernie's input, approved a series of scenarios to move forward for the next round of public comment. And today we have with us Travis Brar from Odot to guide us on what those scenarios are and engage us in discussion and look for input from them. So Travis, I'm gonna turn it over to you, please.
Great, thanks, Paul. Appreciate the introduction. Appreciate the opportunity to come back and chat with you again. We had a good discussion 2 months ago and really appreciated the input we got from the MPC and from many others across the state. We've had great conversations with stakeholders and got a lot of great feedback that has helped inform the proposal that we brought to the Oregon Transportation Commission 2 weeks ago, which I'm going to walk you through today and then seek your feedback on how the OTC should move forward with this. So just a reminder, there's about $1.2 billion in additional funding under the IIJA across roads and transit and active transportation. Of that, about a quarter is in the sustainable transportation area, about a quarter is in the sort of preservation maintenance area, and then about a third of the funding is available to be used for a variety of areas across the transportation system. It's flexible highway program funds in the amount of about $412 million, but this can be used for highways, transit capital, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure as well. So this is the money that the OTC is working through right now, how to spend. Over the last several months, we've taken literally hundreds of comments at meetings like this, and I think received something close to 400 pages of written comment. So obviously a lot of interest in how the state can most effectively spend this IIJA money. What we've heard across the state, major themes, there have been a lot of different things said, but we've boiled it down to a smaller number of themes. So first, across the state, seeing strong support for investing in public and active transportation to improve multimodal accessibility, improve our greenhouse gas emissions, and advance equity. There's also been a lot of support expressed for investing in bridges and for preserving road conditions using the IIJA funds, as well as a desire to address bottlenecks on state highways. Something that's also come through fairly clearly, and I think was a theme of the discussion we had a couple months ago, was interest in addressing the needs of urban arterials in a much more comprehensive way than funding allows for today. There's also been strong support for improving safety across all modes and all programs, regardless of what type of project we're building, and also some interest in investing in fish, wildlife, and environmental projects, given Oregon's very strong green ethos. We've seen similarly interest in expanding electric vehicle charging opportunities across the entire state so that EVs are allowed to roam far and wide across Oregon. And of course, heard regularly a concern about ensuring a fair regional distribution of funds and a desire to invest in regional and local priorities. So that is generally what we've heard all across the state when you amalgamate all that hundreds of public comments that we've received. So what we did with that is we developed a proposed investment plan for the OTC that recommends investing in 9 different program areas. And I'm going to walk you through those and then give you a sense of the options for how we gave the OTC for how to spread money across those different 9 programs. So first off is what we call the Fix It program, focused on preserving the condition of state highways, particularly our high volume connections on the interstate and other major roads that connect communities across the state. So we know that at current funding levels within the STIP, that our road conditions are actually going to decline. That's in part because Fix It was flat funded in the last STIP. It didn't really receive, in fact, it received a little bit less money than it had in the past, but also because our assets are aging. The majority of our bridges are over 50 years old, and our pavement now is aging as well. So we're seeing both of those decline. So we recommend the commission put a little bit of money at least into the Fix It programs, probably primarily pavement and culverts and other assets like that, as there's a direct investment of funding in bridges in IIJA, about $268 million there. We also heard a lot about the need to invest in some bottlenecks on state highways, but there's extremely limited discretionary funding in the 24-27 STIP, only $65 million available statewide. And we've defined some priorities like finishing off HB 2017 projects, where the legislature gave us funding for a phase, but we know we can build the entirety of the project at a slightly greater cost, but usually with greater efficiency. We also know that we have a list of projects we're putting together for the 24-27 STIP, and with more money, we could go further down that list. Also would look to invest in low-cost operational solutions and developing projects for future funding opportunities, whether that's USDOT competitive grants or a next funding package that might come out of the legislature. We also recommended a Great Streets program. This is a colloquial way to call a program focused on urban arterials, whether that's in large cities or smaller communities all across the state, but incorporated areas where we have state highways that are operating as main streets, oftentimes going through downtowns or business districts. We know that these roads really should be safe for all users and prioritize economic and community activity. But many of our urban arterials don't. A lot of them are focused more on throughput of vehicles at fairly high speeds, when they really should be focused on two-put, getting people to destination on these corridors. So we know that they face significant safety, multimodal, and roadway condition needs that are oftentimes difficult to meet because of the way we slice and dice our programs between the legislature and the federal government and ODOT. So this program would be designed to invest in meeting the comprehensive needs of these urban arterials and communities of all sizes with a real focus on safety and multimodal accessibility. We also would recommend putting some additional funding in the Safe Routes to School program. This has been very popular as a way to provide safe ways for kids to get to school as well as broad benefits for many users. This would supplement the funding that was provided by the legislature in HB 2017 and additional investments that were made by the OTC in the last round of the STIP. We have had just a huge outpouring of applications for this program. The last 2 rounds of competitive funding had $4 in requests for every dollar in funding. So we know there's a lot of need out there for these projects that build bike lanes and sidewalks and safe crossings for kids and for community members in general. We also know that there's going to be some need for local governments to do climate planning work under DLCD's proposed transportation planning rule. Cities and counties and MPOs will need to update their local plans to show how they're going to reduce carbon emissions from the transportation system. So we're recommending that the OTC set aside some funding to help local governments do this work as a cost share. That will help implement Governor Brown's executive order on climate and make progress on our climate commitments as a state while reducing the costs that would otherwise be imposed on local governments. Because we've heard a lot about how this could otherwise be an unfunded mandate on cities and counties and MPOs. We also know that we have some additional needs for ADA accessibility. Odot is committed to addressing 26,000 curb ramps on the state highway system that inhibit access for people experiencing disabilities. And we need additional funding to meet the required number of curb ramps through 2027. So we're recommending the OTC put some additional money into this program as well to make sure we're providing that accessibility for all users of the system. In addition, we're recommending the OTC put a little bit of federal money into covering some operations and maintenance needs. You may have heard a little bit that Odot has a pretty substantial O&M budget gap. We face about a $500 million shortfall for maintenance and agency operations, primarily for our on-road maintenance functions, where we've got ODOT staff out there plowing snow, patching potholes, picking up dead deer, all those activities to keep the roads safe and open to travel. So we're recommending that some of this money go to federalize some of those maintenance functions so that we don't have to cut them as deeply in the future. And address the impact IIJA will otherwise have, which due to increased match requirements and staffing costs will actually drive that $500 million deficit even higher than it is today. We also know that there's a lot of money out there for competitive grants, $100 billion that Secretary Mayor Pete gets to hand out over the next 5 years. And unfortunately, ODOT has fairly limited funding available to match these grants because of our operational budget shortfall. So we're recommending that we could federalize some costs and free up some state funding to make a pot of match available for ODOT to apply for RAISE grants, infra grants, wildlife crossings, any of those discretionary grants across the state, which we oftentimes do in partnership with local agencies as well. So this would hopefully help both ODOT and local agencies meet some of their priorities across the state to be able to go after these federal grants. We're recommending about $40 million, which because every $4 of federal requires $1 of match, could leverage up to $160 million in federal funding. We also know that with the IIJA, we're gonna have a lot more projects out there on the ground. That means we're gonna have to expand the workforce and expand the pool of contractors. So we're recommending investing a little bit of money in business and workforce development to expand and diversify who we have available to do the work out on the road. In particular, we would be looking at using this money to support programs for BIPOC and women-owned businesses, as well as programs that help develop a skilled and diverse workforce. In particular, our workforce programs have focused on lowering barriers for populations that have traditionally been excluded from the construction workforce, whether that's women, people of color, people from low-income communities who have traditionally had a harder time accessing this work. So those are the 9 areas that we're recommending the commission invest resources in. But instead of bringing them a specific, dollar by dollar breakdown of how we would recommend they invest, instead we're bringing them funding options or scenarios. So we have laid out 4 different scenarios that the OTC has put out for public comment that give different ways of spending that money, depending on whether the commission wants to put more money into fix-it or enhance highways or public and active transportation, giving them different options for how to go about doing that. Now, it's important to note that the commission has put these out for public comment, but it doesn't necessarily mean that in the end, they're going to select one of these. They're going to listen to public comment. exercise their judgment about which investment areas are most important, and then we'll likely make some adjustments. They may take elements of one and combine it with another. They may modify one of these scenarios. They may create some hybrids. So we're going to see how that public input comes back and how that helps shape the OTC's thinking about the key investments. What we've done is in each of these scenarios, we have set aside $198 million for about half the money for 5 of those program areas, and then split the money in different ways across them. So in the fix-it scenario, about half of the money that is available after those set-asides would go to fix-it, and a quarter each to public and active transportation, that Great Streets program and Safe Routes to School, another quarter to Enhanced Highway. The public and active transportation scenario weights more heavily the Great Streets and Safe Routes to School program, while the Enhanced Highway, as you can imagine, puts more money into Enhanced Highway projects. What we've done then is taken a look at what are the outcomes that each of these scenarios would have on the transportation system. In particular, where are they strongest in those outcomes? So for the Fix-It program, this would help with climate adaptation and resilience in the face of a changing climate and more severe weather. It would also improve the state of good repair, keeping the system in a good state of good condition. The public and active transportation scenario would best address climate mitigation, reducing GHG, for example, as well as enhance multimodal accessibility and mobility, and improve social equity by improving multimodal accessibility. The modernization or enhanced scenario really is focused more on congestion relief or safety benefits. And so we are putting that information out to the public to show where these scenarios have their greatest impact. And then really asking you for your insight on which of these scenarios you would prefer. Which investment areas should the commission invest more in, as well as any comments on those investment areas. In terms of the process and timeline, we are working through this now over the period of the month of February is really a public comment period on the funding options. The commission is going to have another meeting on the 17th of February, where we're going to talk primarily about the new programs like bridges and EV charging things, not the flexible funding. And we're going to be taking public comment at that meeting and March 10th. We're hoping to get the public comment record really wrapped up by March 10th so the commission can get all of that, have a conversation about their, what they see coming out of that and their investment priorities, and then ask us essentially at Odot to bring back an option or two for them to review and then select and approve a final funding allocation in March, so that we can get project selection and project development beginning in April. So we've got about 2 months left in this process before we really get down to the business of selecting projects. In terms of providing feedback, I think many of you have already taken the opportunity to submit comments through the OTC's website. We're also going to have an online open house that will be available starting as early as tomorrow, but as late as Monday. That will let you weigh in on these scenarios and programs. And then, of course, there's the opportunity to provide public comment at the OTC's meetings on February 17th and March 10th. So I will wrap it up, but I wanted to leave you with a couple of questions that we're specifically asking for feedback on. Of course, you can give us feedback on any element of this proposal, but in particular, given the investments that have already been made in the STIP and the dedicated funds in the IIJA, are these the correct areas, those 9 areas, to invest these flexible funds? And then last, which funding scenario best helps Oregon achieve our transportation community goals? And should we make any modifications to those scenarios when the commission ultimately makes its decision about how to spend this IIJA money? So with that, I will wrap up, and I would love to hear any comments and questions and thoughts you might have.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay. When you are so good at your presentations, I remember you from before, and I admire that talent. You're talking about $100 billion in federal money being available, and Oregon doesn't have matching money for a lot of that. Do I understand we may be cutting back some of our projects so we'll have money available for that matching?
Yes, it's essentially we would set aside some of this money and use it to federalize programs that are currently funded out of state dollars, and then take that money and have it available for a pot of money to go leverage federal dollars. So we think that that's a good way to invest the resources so that we can go after those federal dollars more. I mean, at a 4-to-1 rate of return it could be a really good investment to bring more money home.
It is a good investment. I understand. Thank you. Anybody else? He's asked, he wants questions, so people ask him questions.
Chair.
Okay. Commissioner Bernie?
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, let me tell you guys something. If you look on your screen, you see my name up there twice. Up on this screen, I've got everybody, and down here I only have one picture. So I'm signed up twice with Zoom. So I have to look up here and see who's got their hand up.
Well, even though Paul has called you chair, I'm going to refer to you as vice chair. And vice chair, I only see your name up once.
Yeah, actually, my face, my image, and the name up there. So I'm up there twice. I get to vote.
Okay. Travis, right?
Yes.
Okay. I know that you have to talk really fast because, right? Because there's so much to cover. But you asked for input, so I'm going to give you input. But I also know that oftentimes if you have as staff a lot of people you're accountable to, not you, I'm speaking rhetorically, you can always, you have to be accountable to so many people. You can always choose what you want, what you like is being heard, and disregard the rest because you'll be accountable to other people. But I'm just speaking for myself. One, you talk about any time a state agency is talking about $500 million or something for this item, I question the cost. I always put, can't you get more for that amount of money? So that's number one. I'm sure there's a methodology behind getting these gargantuan numbers, but I sure as hell don't know what it is. That just a comment. Mm-hmm. Number two, you talked about business and workforce development. You talked about bringing in BIPOC or people that have been historically excluded from the trades. For goodness sake, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Union and non-union trades all have apprenticeship programs. Mm-hmm. They all already target women, minorities, and veterans, now disabled, for bringing them into apprenticeship programs. When they do that, they guarantee jobs. So I would suggest, and maybe you already are, I would suggest not looking at how you can finance a new system and duplicate it, but look at how you can exponentially leverage the system that exists. I know for a fact that 7 of the 14 or so trades that are part of the Oregon Building Trades Association are wanting and needing assistance expanding their training centers so they can bring in more apprentices because the demand is so huge. So that's my suggestion there. Don't duplicate, right? Leverage. The Oregon Department, the Oregon Department of Transportation, apparently with its zillions of employees, is having a political argument about what the best level to accept what Lane County has piloted and is now available through Senate Bill 420, how they're going to develop a community benefits agreement to guide all this construction you're talking about. So my recommendation is bring the dollar amounts that will be adhered to down to $2 or $3 million. And when you do that, you all of a sudden achieve all of these community benefits you're talking about, because they all talk about workforce equity. They talk about employer paid family health insurance. They talk about requiring a certain amount of renewable storage and microgrid technology. So there's a lot. So that's another recommendation that I'm just making. Finally, and thank you, board, for bearing with me. Finally, I believe, and you might correct me if I'm wrong, your chart talked about a pie and it said something like 4% for EV. Well, I may be wrong, but I'll bet dollars to donuts that that's not looking at ways you can offset by a few $1,000s each residents and commercial buildings from putting EVs in their garages. It's probably looking at a state highway transportation and places for folks to pit stop. I'm going to suggest that there's a more community-based, cost-effective, efficient, and exponentially more impactful way to approach that. And so I'm going to request that you all look at ways that some of those, because 4% of the amount of money I think you talked about, well, it's a lot of money. I got $48 million, but I don't know if I did my math right. So I'm recommending that you look at that, because that's a non-traditional, non-government, common sense approach, and it will create a blank load more jobs. And finally, you talked about the Secretary of Transportation having $100 billion and saving a certain amount. Well, Oregon has 1.2% of this country's population. 1.2% of $100 billion is $1.2 billion. That was an easy one. I think what you need to do is get at least 1.2 billion in, as opposed to your $160 million projection from those federal funds. And I know I spoke too long. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Fight for it.
Richard, your point about the apprenticeship programs, we at Odot currently invest about $1 million a year in the apprenticeship system. And that would be the program that we'd be looking to plus up and continue our investment there. And you're right, there is a discussion going on now about community benefits agreements for projects and what the thresholds will be. So we're definitely engaged in that.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
We have Paul next, and then Mayor Bennis.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I wanted to set a little more context now that we've seen the presentation, and I'm going to quickly share my screen, Travis. I'll steal one of your slides. This slide in his presentation summarized the analysis and the trade-offs of the proposed scenarios. And what I want to point out here is that not only in your discussion over the past couple of months, but also over the past year or more, as you discussed the 24-27 STIP investments by the OTC, you prioritize the public and active transportation. And that is scenario 2 currently under this funding proposal. And notice a little check mark at the bottom, which is the maximum total return on investment against the priority outcome areas. ODOT's analysis shows that scenario 2 provides that maximum total return on investment. Scenario 2 provides about 50% of the funding towards the priorities that you've established and testified to the OTC on. So in going forward in today's meeting, not only giving testimony or input to Travis now, but I would ask the MPC direct staff, me, to prepare written testimony for the February 17th OTC meeting, presumably supporting scenario 2. Thank you.
Mayor Bennis is next.
No, thanks. Thanks so much.
No, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the presentation. It was a lot of information, really fast. And Paul, thank you for that clarification, because that was the part of my launching point. Was we have already really had this discussion about the second scenario and felt pretty convinced that that was the way to go. The great streets really are the sort of, that's the new program that's sort of critical in that second scenario, correct? That's really the new look at strategizing around that.
Yeah, correct. It would, that second scenario would put most of the money or the largest share of money into great streets and safe routes to school.
Right. Yeah. So that sounds great to me. And the only thing, that I think locally for us may be a little bit different than some of the other, communities, is that in Eugene, for instance, we took over a state highway 89 before it got this wonderful renaming as a potential great street. And so I guess I'm wondering if could be more, understanding mostly these would be, the great streets would apply to ODOT highways. And given that we're a community that doesn't have many left because we have taken them into our own street system, is there a possibility that some of that great streets funding could support our work to increase the multimodal safety of those formerly state highways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. I think that that's a good point. And that's something we've heard in a couple other communities. You know, in the Portland metro region, more of the urban arterials are owned by the state. So they've been focused on a lot of the state, you know, orphan highways. I would say that would be a great comment for you all to make in your comments to the OTC, that perhaps broadening this program to focus on current and former state highways could be appropriate.
Okay, Mayor Van Gordon.
Thank you. I'm comfortable with us submitting testimony to sort of support that as what Paul outlined. And I just, every time I see this presentation, I always think it's a lot of money and not enough money all at the same time. So I'm really conscientious of the fact that we could get too cute by half, right? Like we could try to do too many things instead of really focusing on what our community priorities are and making a difference so that people can see progress in their everyday life to say that this kind of infrastructure investment pays off. So I would just sort of add that sort of caution back to, you know, the Odot folks, and like it's easy to say that this is a lot of money and we can spread it a long way, but we need to make sure we move the dial for folks. And I think that's where we've talked about the last couple of months.
Good point. Yeah, and we, you know, as we've analyzed the funding, we've pointed out that this is, you know, just a fraction of the size of the HB 2017 investment. So it really is not as substantial as people had hoped.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Is everybody in agreement with Paul going forward with his?
Mayor Smith is waving his hand.
Oh, let's see. Okay, he's up here. Mr. Mayor Smith, please. Sorry.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I just want to echo, as Mayor Van Gordon and Mayor Venice, I think that Mayor Venice, it's a state highway, even though the city took it over. You look on the maps, it's still a state highway. So I think that's a valid concern that we should be looking at eligibility in our local area for a state highway that the jurisdiction has changed. As far as Mayor Van Gordon and the frustration with it's a little bit of money for a whole lot of projects again, and I'm going to go back to echoing my statement I made at the last meeting. It's time for this MPC to really start prioritizing and saying this is what we want to get done and get some success and show all of us that we could get something done here instead of always trying to spread this minuscule amount over a vast amount of projects. It's time to really see what our priority is and all of us go for that priority. Thank you.
Any other hands? I don't see any yet. Anyway, I mentioned a few minutes ago, is everybody in agreement with Paul going ahead with this drafting a proposal, a letter? I believe that's okay. Paul, you're on your way.
Thank you.
Okay, I will move on to here. Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act. Agenda item staff presentation, which we Paul.
Yes, again, thank you, Vice Chair. This one is mine. So there is a cover memo in your packet that pretty much lays out what we're asking today related to Resolution 2022-04. I'll give a quick summary. Congress passed last year the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act, or CRRSA Act, or CRRSA funding. Part of that CRRSA funding, in addition to doing many things and providing coronavirus relief funding, actually directed some relief funding specifically to MPOs in the country. The Central Lane MPO is slated to receive $2,018,930 of relief funding from that act. The first step into receive that funding is to let FHWA, USDOT, know what form of funding we want to receive. The Act really gives us two options. The first option is to receive it as essentially what would be similar to our previous or normal STBG funding. In other words, transportation specific funding with a few expanded purposes that this $2 million could be used for. The second option under the Carissa funding would allow us to receive it as relief funding. And relief funding is just sort of the general term I'm using, but the bottom line, if we choose option 2 to receive it as relief funding, is that the MPO would work with USDOT and Odot, and we would receive it as non-federal money with no match required, and frankly, no other strings required because it would not be federal money. And it would be then up to MPC at a future date to determine how to use that funding. The only thing we need today, and we're requesting through the passage of Resolution 2022-04, is for MPC to choose which way to receive the funding. The staff and Transportation Planning Committee recommendation is to receive it under option 2, because again, that is just a much less restrictive, much more flexible source of funding for us. And if you approve that, we will then work with USDOT and ODOT, get their approval of that decision. And when the funding is released, we would come back to you and ask for direction on how to use that funding.
Thank you. Okay, now we have questions, comments, and discussion on members. How do we feel about that? I gotta look up here and see if there's any hands. I don't see any hands yet. You're pretty okay, Mayor Venice.
Just lead the way. I think it seems to make a lot of sense to use this as relief funds. I mean, there's no match required. I mean, all of your arguments make a lot of sense. So that option seems like the most sensible one.
Any other discussion? I see none. Then I would ask for a motion for approval.
I move that we accept the resolution 2022-04.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Moved in second for approval of, let's find it here, resolution 2022-04. Nod your hands. I can see everybody up here, so nod your heads. Okay, hands up. Okay, done. Thank you. Okay, now we go on to Central Lane MPO governance structure agenda item and ask for staff presentation.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'll take this one. Thank you. I really appreciate everyone's patience and flexibility with me as I try to get settled in out here on the East Coast, where transportation is a little crazy right now. This particular item doesn't have an action on it, but you have a memo in your packet that talks about the formation of the Central Lane Metropolitan Planning Organization. So in 1974, the governor appointed, I guess, the Lane Council of Governments as the Central Lane MPO. So all metropolitan areas in the United States that have a population of at least 50,000 or above must have a planning organization, a metropolitan planning organization. In some areas of the country, they're called transportation planning organizations. But to accept and plan projects and the use of federal transportation dollars for those projects. In 1987, the cities of Springfield, Eugene, and Lane County created the Metropolitan Policy Committee, so the MPC. And the MPC was created primarily to deal with the Metro General Area Plan, so land use issues within the metropolitan area. But it made sense at that time to the elected officials that 3 other committees either be consolidated or disbanded. And the activities that fell under those other committees would be activities that the newly formed MPC would then handle. So you're familiar with the Cable Commission, and we often bring items that fall under the jurisdiction of the Cable Commission to part of the MPC, as well as a transportation committee that was under the Lane Council of Governments board that did handle the policy decisions for the Central Lane MPO. And then there was an urban services committee. And so those items fell under the MPC in 1987. Since 1987, and this is not something that we have brought to the MPC since I've been involved, but parks issues, some parks issues also are to come to the MPC. So in 2002, the Lane Council of Governments board, which is the policy board for the MPO, delegated additional authority to the MPC, primarily the transportation decision-making, because the projects that are built with federal dollars occur within the metro area. So for those of you that don't know, and those of you in the audience, the Lane Council of Governments covers all of Lane County, and we have 35 members. So the county, all 12 incorporated cities, 6 school districts, 3 utilities, Lane Community College, LTD, which is also a member of the MPC, the Port of Siuslaw, and several special districts, including Siuslaw Valley Fire and Rescue, Willamette Parks and Recreation. And so because we covered all of Lane County, at that time, the LCOG board felt that more planning for the Central Lane MPO and the federal transportation dollars should be delegated to the MPC. So primarily that delegation was to provide, to make policy decisions on transportation projects and the planning process, to adopt the RTP, which just went through, the Unified Planning Work Plan, the TIP, the Air Quality Conformity Determination, the Congestion Management Plan, and other responsibilities that are required of MPOs under state and federal law. The previous agenda item that we just talked about, the SRSA funding, raised some questions about which body is the MPO. And so this is why we're bringing this to you, more for education, but also to begin a question and a conversation about whether the LCOG board should clarify its delegation to the MPC. And that is certainly a conversation that I would like to have with the LCOG board. So Lane County, Eugene, Springfield, LTD, and Coburg are all represented on the LCOG board and are members of LCOG. And so they will be involved in that. But the question really is, you know, what exactly was the delegation, and should that delegation be changed? And the reason that this came up was because, as Paul pointed out, the federal dollars under SRSA could be accepted by MPOs 2 separate ways. They could go through the regular Surface Transportation Block Grant process, the STBG process, which primarily is the planning and use of federal transportation dollars to preserve and improve transportation facilities like roads, bridges, bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Or it could be accepted because of a lot of work that Odot did in developing a formula and also agreeing to report on these funds, could be accepted as state funds without those federal strings and ties. And the MPO could use those funds for pretty much anything it wanted to. The issue arose with US DOT in that they weren't clear who should accept the funding and who got to make the decision as to how those dollars would be used. USDOT told me that it needed to go through the Surface Transportation Block Grant process that we normally went through. But again, that was the use of federal dollars for transportation projects. Very few MPOs in the nation have delegated their policymaking authority to another body, which is what caused the confusion. So this conversation with USDOT has taken almost a year for us to get to this point. So I thank you for adopting that resolution. I think that's a really important step for the Central Lane MPO, because what that means is that the policymakers, you, get to make a decision about how those dollars are used. Because what was happening was USDOT was telling us how those dollars needed to be used when they said it had to go through the STBG process. I didn't feel that that was right. I felt that the policymakers should be able to make the decision on how you wanted to use those funds. And so I think that that's where we're at. But that also opens the way to have the conversation about the delegation of authority from the LCOG board to the MPC and what needs to be clarified. So that's a summary of the issues and how we got to today in this conversation. I'm happy to answer any questions you have and take any comments. As the memo says, we'll be continuing this conversation with the MPC, but we will also be having this conversation with the LCOG board to look at ways to clarify that delegation.
LCOG, MPO, and MPC.
Yes.
Any questions? I see I'm looking at the up here. You're very good. Very good. So thank you. Oh, okay.
There is a hand. Oh, here
yeah,
they
I see a hand up there now. Oh, two hands now. Go ahead.
I'll start. So Brenda, this has kind of come to a head because we were allocated some funding from the government, which I believe is still up in the air at the moment as to what we're going to do with it. Am I right?
Correct. So the first decision was made, and that was to receive it as relief funding. So that was the previous agenda item. So now USDOT has said that once that decision was made, they would release the funding. So they're going to release the funding, and then we will bring back the question as to how those dollars should be used.
And so right now, as it stands, the Lane Council of Governments is the one that is the body that makes that decision, unless we discuss delegating that to this body, the MPC. Am I on track still?
Commissioner Buck, I would say that the MPC just made the decision to accept the funding, and the MPC will be the body that has the conversation on how those dollars will be used.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to,
yes,
being on the board of LCOG and also on this one, I'm trying to make sure that I view them in the right lane, so that when we move forward, everybody knows whose delegation is what. Now, do we still need to have a conversation about how to codify that policy decision making in our bylaws?
Commissioner Buck, yes, I would say that that clarification would be very helpful.
Because hopefully we will get money like this rained down on us again in the future, if we're lucky, and be in such a position that we need to make sure that this is not as muddy as an issue as it has been in this circumstance.
Commissioner Buck, that's very true. This type of funding, this type of flexible funding was never contemplated, which is why a delegation doesn't specifically state that.
And then would we have to alter that language in both this body as well as the Lane Council of Governments body?
Commissioner Buck, well, as you know, Commissioner Buck, you are the chair of the LCOG board. So I am going to try and make all of this as easy as possible on both the LCOG board as well as the MPC. I think that we can do it without taking a lot of time and a lot of formality. I think that we can just make it as clear as possible in the most simplest way. And the reason that I want to do that is because these funds need to be allocated by September of 2024. We need to spend this money.
Right. And I just had one final question. Thank you for your patience, everybody. The previous version of allocating this money, at least originally, when it was discussed on the LCOG board, was to have a portion of it fund somebody in the technology department to review regional plans and perhaps work on grant opportunities for rural internet or broadband through the IIJA. Now that the decision-making is coming through this body, is that still on the table?
Commissioner Buck, yes. And so, as you just saw, there's a lot of money that is going to be placed on the table under the IIJA. And some of that funding is for broadband, not only the planning of broadband, but the build out of broadband. And it's broadband more and more is tied closely to transportation. As the executive director of the Lane Council of Governments, but also as the executive director of the Central Lane MPO, I would recommend, because that funding is so flexible and there is not that type of flexible funding out, that we set aside some of that funding to develop a regional broadband plan, which we do not have, which means we are not ready, nor are we able to apply for broadband funding because we don't have a plan. And this is the type of money, it's a gift that we're being given that we can use to develop a regional broadband plan. And my recommendation would be to use it for that because there just isn't other types of funding that are available to that. That will make us eligible for broadband funding that's in the IIJA. And that will be my recommendation to both bodies. But again, it's the MPC that would make that decision.
Next question, Mayor Van Gordon.
Thank you. I think this is a pretty important conversation, and I know it's going to take a little while to make sure that we sort of get everybody sort of clarified. And I think outside the money, right, like about how we adopt it and how we recognize the money, I think the thing that when I think about where sort of victory is, right, is making sure everybody has clear running lanes and clear levels of clear roles and responsibilities. And that's where I would like to see us go, because I don't want to be put in a position where it's confusing for people that as a policy body that we essentially have the other board of directors that, you know, arguably could veto us, right? Like, you know, clarity matters here, and, you know, we'll get there, but I want to at least put the plug in for that. And with that, I have to go because I have to go testify for LCDC.
And good luck.
Good luck.
Yeah.
I'll need it. Take care, guys.
Okay, Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So I still have the question of the process issue, in that being on the LCOG board and then being on the MPC, we get this money and the discussion is we're going to determine where that money goes. Do we still have this responsibility that LCOG is the MPO, that they have to actually approve what this board, what this committee does? So if we have that discussion and determine where we want to put that money, are we the final say in this local area, or does it still have to go through LCOG because they're the MPO? So that, is there that veto power or that approval still in that other tier, that upper tier? So that's the question I have, and I think we keep bringing up all the time, is where is that authority, and do we have it? Do we have to have these this discussion here and then go to the other one to get the approval for federal standards or whatever. So with that question, I'm not seeking an answer now. I just feel like that's the question that comes out all the time. The other one is your discussion on broadband and a plan. I totally agree with that. And some of the stuff is so simple. Here in Coburg, we have had new development. And one of the issues that was brought up after a first neighborhood development was underground utilities. We mandated it in the development under our master plan. When they were all done, there's no conduit for broadband in that neighborhood. And so we learned a lesson the hard way that if we run any broadband into that neighborhood, now we're gonna have to bore it. And so having a plan really works, and to learn those simple lessons like putting a 4-inch conduit in a neighborhood so that we can run data for the future. You know, Coburg's behind in the broadband, as is so many areas. And I think that plan is a really good start. We've got to have a plan so we know, we learn from the hard lessons and move forward and make it as efficient as possible when these funds are available to be able to get that broadband out there. Thank you.
Okay.
Vice Chair. Oh,
go ahead.
I was just going to respond very quickly, Vice Chair Mo. So you're correct, Mayor Smith, in that the LCOG board can pull back its delegation at any time. I would not recommend that at all. That conversation came up because we were trying to get the money into this metro region, and USDOT was having a hard time releasing that money because they wanted it to go through the STBG process, which would have basically allocated those funds for transportation projects. And I didn't believe that FHWA should be the ones that made that decision. So again, I want to make this as easy as possible. I don't think the LCOG board should veto what the MPC does. And so it'll be like these two conversations are occurring at the same time. But we will go through a process that is easy and makes it very clear that this type of funding, although it was never contemplated, is the type of policy decision that the MPC can make. We will have that conversation at the LCOG board level and have that delegation made clear. And you know, hopefully this type of funding won't be the last time we see this.
Okay, Mayor Venice.
Yeah, I actually really want to thank you for this, Brenda, because I think you've brought a lot of clarity to the challenge here, and kind of sort of rephrasing what you've just said to make sure that I've got it straight. The MPC has acquired additional responsibilities in the past. I mean, it's not new for it to get a sort of a broader reach than maybe was initially envisioned. And the question, I mean, this came up because we are a metropolitan planning agency, and LCOG is speaking for 33 communities. So something that is sort of core to our mission felt like it shouldn't be decided by a bunch of other metropolitan areas that are not part of our mission. So just to put that in place, it does seem to me, and I appreciate your comments, that we're all invested in the broadband. It's definitely a goal. And so it feels to me like this sort of well orchestrated series of conversations is going to be if we're delegated to do this and we get that important information about these funds through the MPO so that we're able to make that decision. So that decision is then respected by the MPO, or it's good. And I think that's, I think the tension really was, concern about having authority taken away that actually has been not questioned in the past. It just, as you say, this is a new circumstance. So I appreciate that. It feels, I'm really grateful for the conversation and for your explanation.
Commissioner Bernie.
Thank you, Vice Chair. First, Brenda, I have to say that if you didn't tell us about the hellacious time you're having back east, I would just presume looking at you that you are refreshed and settled. And so it's just absolutely amazing, really, truly. The disconnect there. You're doing great. Second, no, I mean that sincerely. I've been in situations like you're in it, and to stay calm and to focus on this, and then to deal with all hell breaking loose. Second, I want to preface this by saying that to everyone that Director Wilson, on more occasions than I can even think of, has provided such amazing background information and support. So to me, so a lot of times things are they're clear as mud and they cover the ground, and that's when I go to her. And this is another example. I think that Ray, if I can use first names, that Ray articulated really for me what the issue was, right? Lucy explained exactly sort of how the circumstances changed and a total satisfaction with what you're saying. And I just want to echo that. Times change, stuff happens. Institutions and bureaucracies typically have to, by definition, lag a little behind, but it sounds like there's really no issue here. And it sounds like soon we will have this codified and it'll be clear, and we can all just get about our business and start maximizing our use of funds that are available for our communities. So thank you.
Okay, one more here. Mr. Jordan.
Yeah, it's always difficult to speak in these situations because, I'm an individual and I'm supposed to represent the board and the district, and we haven't had that discussion. But I'm aware, that we're hiring a new IT director, and he's asking for direction from us. And it's really, when we get into the broadband and transportation issues, they're very well connected. And at this point in the history of transportation development, we're looking at the possibilities of moving into a lot more of autonomous vehicles and stuff, and that requires more broadband, and it's part of our mission to serve transportation services throughout the area. There's nothing that we can do with this information now, but just kind of throwing it out there just to be in the consciousness of the people who are listening, that how the broadband and the Transportation Commission, or the transportation services, will be, very tied together. So I'm just bringing that up as a comment. Nothing else no movement from it. Thank you.
Good. Anybody else? That was really interesting. What we need to do. And I'm glad LCOG trusts us for our decisions. They haven't interfered. So far so good, but let's make sure that we can do that and not worry about it. Paul, your picture came up. Yeah.
Oh, no, thank you.
Okay. Well, okay, discussion, that was good. So now, Odot update with Ronnie Brindle.
Thank you, Vice Chair. What a great meeting. I got so much information, history of MPC, it's amazing. And I know this community should be very grateful that the leadership shown in this committee in accepting and then administering funds that come into the community. Brilliant. So let's see, a couple things. There is an Oregon Community Pass program, grant program that's coming up. The pre-application stage will start in August, so we have plenty of time. The real applications happen later in August through September. But the good news is there's going to be some webinars on the applications, who could apply, what kind of programs they are, what kind of funding you could go for. The first one is on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. And then there'll be others mid-month in April and May. So you'll be seeing that out of Odot. And then secondly, the Lane Act is meeting next Thursday, next Wednesday. We're going to be talking about the Coburg Interchange. We're going to have Mayor Smith come and talk about the purpose and need for that project. And then in meetings thereafter, we're going to talk about special programs or projects that are on that list of that you've already prioritized and sent over to the Lane Act. The Lane Act is not acted on a priority list of projects on the state system yet because they're waiting for the strategy, the Lane Act strategy, to be completed before they weigh in on that priority list. So we're going to have presentations on each of the projects on that list starting this month. And finally, I wanted to announce that I'm going to be retiring at the end of March. I've had over 30 years with the state of Oregon, most of it within the transportation and environmental, land use, and then in the last 9.5 years as an area manager. And it's been my honor to work with you all. So this meeting and next meeting will be my last one as an area manager, I think. I know that the agency is grappling with how to fill my position, how they'll do it, when it'll happen, when they could get the position filled. But you should know that you'll have some input on whoever my successor is, as was done when I was chosen. You'll either be invited, members will be invited to an interview panel. And so that would be great to be able to get your input on who will succeed me. So thank you.
You can't go, we need you. Commissioner Brindle.
Yes, I appreciate the opportunity for input, Franny. Do we have any input on whether you retire or not? I think I know the answer to that question. As a fellow Springfielder, it's really been a delight to work with you, and I mean that sincerely, and get to know you, because I wouldn't have otherwise. And I also want to say that your announcement and other announcements I've heard like that really made me question why the hell I'm running for re-election when I could retire too. but thank you very much. You've been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Okay, Mayor Smith.
Bummer. That's all I got to say.
Yeah.
Franny, you've been a great help to Coburg and our little town, and we're the little mouse in the corner that roars. And you've been very helpful to have our voice heard, and your team has given us a lot of good advice in our planning. And obviously the interchange over the years, the entire time you've been there, you've been the voice for that for us. So really going to miss that. And we will definitely have input on your replacement. We'll be giving input. But thank you for everything you've done for us and everybody here. I appreciate your professionalism, your great humor, and the knowledge that you have given to us. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Smith.
You are popular. Everybody wants to talk to you. Mayor Venus.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to chime in also, Franny. It's really just been a pleasure to work with you, and I agree with all my colleagues have said about the expertise and the professionalism you bring to the role, and you're just a pleasure to know and to work with, and we will miss you deeply. So I hope you have a wonderful next chapter in your life. And really appreciate your service to the state and to our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mayor.
And Commissioner Birch.
Franny, I'm shocked, and then I'm not shocked. Because everybody seems to be retiring this last 6 months. The institutional knowledge that you have that is going to go with you is going to be deeply, deeply missed. And I personally, it's just been a pleasure to work with you. And I know that we still have some meetings left with you, and you'll be getting this praise until the last day, I'm sure. But I too will just really, really miss having you in these meetings and your expertise. I appreciate everything that you have done.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start crying here in a minute. Well, I will say that whoever my replacement is, I'm going to be coaching and reminding them of what a special group of people you are and how to talk to you and how to work with you. And so just trust me on that. The transition, I'll help make it smooth as possible.
I found that you are one of my neighbors up here on Kelly Butte, and I haven't seen you yet. I hope we really get to visit. You're a very wonderful person to know, and your knowledge is incredible. So
thank you.
Anybody else up here? Okay. Then we're going to be administrative amendments, talking about those. Do we have any comments, MPC members on the document? We're not going to.
As usual, the one amendment this month is in your packet just for your information.
Yep. Are we going to make approve it or make a motion to approve it?
No, this is information only.
Oh, okay. Okay. Because it said pass and approved a certain day of February. Am I looking at the right thing? Never mind. Never mind. Okay. Let's move on. Next steps, agenda build. MPC members and staff, is there any input on next or future agendas?
I will just reiterate what we said at the beginning of the meeting, that one of the major agenda items next month will be looking forward to the next several years of transportation planning activities and how we will involve you and keep you informed and ask for your guidance and perhaps choices on what to focus on. We also may have another round of discussion on the IIJA funding with Mr. Brower. Depends on what the OTC does in a couple of weeks and whether they have additional comments or request additional comments after their next meeting. But those will be the two major topics.
Great. So anything else from anybody for anything? Then it's time for me to adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.